And to start, my name is Olajumoke Akinchilere. Most of you know me as Jimmy. I am the president of the Black Student Union.
Hi, I'm Brianne Jilts. I'm the Black Heritage Series programmer.
Hello, I'm Thorolf Eisen, and I'm also a programmer for the Black Heritage Series.
We'd like to thank you all for joining us again for a evening that promises to be rich of timely dialogue. And we'd also like to thank a lot of the departments that helped make this event possible. That is the Modern Culture and Media Department, the Office of the Vice Provost of the Arts for sponsoring this event, and also from the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America, the Departments of Africana Studies, the Pembroke Center, the Center for Students of Color. And in a moment during which Brown is actively evaluating manners via which we build inclusions into all aspects of our experience as a university, support for programming and this nature by campus organizations and departments is completely invaluable.
Professor Margo Jefferson is a Pulitzer Prize-winning cultural critic who currently teaches at Columbia University, having previously held staff positions at the New York Times and Newsweek. Her reviews and essays have appeared in New York Magazine, Grand Street, Harper's, and American Vogue, for which she authored the September issue's cover story on Beyoncé.
Her first book, on Michael Jackson, holistically examines its namesake's cultural impact, using the megastar as a lens through which the complex assessments of America's processing of race, masculinity, class, and culture are gleaned. Her recently published memoir, Negroland, tells the story of her family and many others, these members of America's Black socio-economic elite, prior to the fictionalized Huxtable's entrance into the nation's homes on Thursday evenings, remained virtually mythical in the national consciousness.
Kibwe Chase Marshall spent a decade working as an apparel and accessories designer for some of 7th Ave's most influential brands, Michael Kors, Oscar de la Renta, and Isaac Mizrahi among them, prior to studying at Brown University, where he received his BA in Modern Culture and Media in 2010. Having fallen in love with the written word while on College Hill, he turned his focus to fashion journalism and market editing, covering the seasonal ready-to-wear collections for fashion news sources like WGSN, Elle.com, and Fashionista.com. He now works as a consultant for emerging designers looking to grow their visibility within American and international design markets.
And without further ado, we'd like you all to help us welcome our guests, Kibwe Marshall and Margo Jefferson.
Good evening. Hello.
Hello.
I am thrilled and honored to be back at Brown, though some would say I never leave. I try to visit quite often, and in doing so, I have pushed myself to find ways to bring to your experience as students that which I really appreciated during mine, and some of the speakers that came to campus while I was here really enriched my experience. So about 4 months ago, I saw a friend of mine post that he was reading a book called Negroland on Instagram. And his name's Justin Allen, and he is one of the most sort of culturally explorative people that I know. He leaves no stone unturned. And so between the fact that he was reading the book and the fact that the book has such a chic cover, I said, okay.
From the archives of Ebony Magazine, 1964.
Wow. I thought, this I must read. I picked up the book and immediately became captivated by how it touched upon elements of my experience and my friends' experiences that I felt consistently go underexplored in our literature space and in our media space. And as I delved deeper into not just the book, but the author's backstory, I learned that this was potentially someone and a book that I felt could really make young Black students' experiences at Brown, it could enrich those experiences and shed some perspective on them. So I would like to introduce Margo Jefferson. And I want to begin by learning a little bit about you, your family.
All right.
And we'll talk about your book. So
Okay.
Let's start by talking about your family. Tell me about your mother.
The formidable Irma James Armstrong Jefferson. All right. My mother was born in 1916, 4 years before women got the vote.
And where was this?
This was a little mythological in the family. She always used to say that she was born in Indiana.
Okay.
And actually her birth certificate does say that, but at some point it appeared that maybe she was born in Mississippi and then came up to Indiana very quickly after, so they waited on the birth certificate because they didn't want her to be born in Mississippi.
Wow.
And her father was at Purdue. Booker T. Washington had sent him there for some additional engineering courses. He was going to help supervise the installation of a new system there.
This is your grandfather.
This was my grandfather.
So there were-
He died in the 1918 flu epidemic.
Wow.
And my grandmother, probably some of you have further back, you know this pattern. She had gone to a very small, she'd grown up actually on a farm in Mississippi that they owned. They owned a general store. A number of you have read Zora Neale Hurston, yes?
As we're watching
It was
that.
a little bit like Jody, the second husband,
Okay.
and the store they owned, and nice property that they had been given in part by a benevolent white ancestor. But some of them were benevolent within
you
limits.
said that quite quickly.
Yes, I did. Benevolent within confinement. But if you inherited land, you were glad to get it.
We're going to come back to that.
We'll come back to
Okay.
that. In any case, my grandmother had gone to one of these tiny little black colleges in Mississippi called Rust College.
So your grandparents were the first college-educated generation
Yes.
in your mother's family.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. This is not like what Intisaki once called, those black families, who's the ones whose daddy was a great, was a senator in Reconstruction. No, no. She was funny. I mean, she could make those delineations too. But my grandmother, she. You can teach school when you're a young black woman in the 20s in Mississippi. You're not going to it's going to be harder when you move to St. Louis. And the
Okay.
family moved there for betterment. They brought property, etc. She also became a widow. Young widows in those days, especially young widows of color, you learn other skills like
Okay.
dressmaking, for example.
Yes,
It was really moving to Chicago with her little daughter Irma, for whom she wanted more.
Okay.
There, she was able to get out of the dressmaker trade, though she, always sewed well, and start working her way into politics,
Okay.
into city politics, black city politics.
So that's your mother's side. Now tell me about your father.
My father's family, they began in Mississippi also. And the mother had also gone to Rust College, my father's mother. But in a little town, Coffeyville, Mississippi, yes, it was called Coffeyville, she did a little of everything. There are pictures of her teaching in a little black school, probably that served lots of grades. She also did dressmaking. She took in laundry.
And I'm sorry,
She did all
I
of
froze
those
on
things.
Coffeyville.
Coffeyville!
Is Coffeyville called Coffeyville for the reason that I assume Coffeyville is called Coffeyville? Why DC that I grew up in is called Chocolate City?
I think I need to investigate
Okay,
that.
because I feel like they weren't growing coffee there.
Because you were right about that.
Okay.
But there were plenty of white people in the town.
Okay.
But it's a good question. I didn't do as much research on my father's
Yeah.
family. Also, there are other stories that
Okay.
became bigger. That's very funny, though.
My knowledge
Nomenclature
of the American
means a lot.
cultural sort of canon indicates to me that it's called Coffeyville for the reasons we might assume.
It might be a little painful. One of many painful memories about Mississippi my father managed to suppress.
Okay.
Yeah. But the what happened with their family, the father was what they called a master carpenter, my father's father. He had his own little crew. And they built lots of houses, but the mother was the one who absolutely determined they're all going to go to college, graduate school. My sons are going to be doctors and lawyers. And my one daughter, well, she can be a school teacher. That's fine. They left Mississippi when various pressures. There are a series of family stories about this, but had to do with little displays of arrogance.
Wow.
The oldest sister, my father's oldest sister, came back also from Rust College and would not say ma'am, or she would say yes, Mrs. So-and-so.
Sort of in town.
Yes, by a white person.
Okay.
There's also a tale that she, being asked to deliver laundry that my grandmother had done, insisted on delivering it to the front door. So.
And this,
these were
in the contemporary context, term arrogance.
Exactly.
It was uppityness.
It was called uppityness then.
Okay.
Things built up, and as the story goes, there are a few other stories that have to be verified. My grandfather was called to the general store after hours one night, and a group of white men were waiting. And they said, you really haven't been, you and your family have not been behaving very well. As the story goes, my grandfather, who was peppery as well as uppity, pulled out a gun and said, he knew perfectly well that physical violence could come. He said, you can do what you want, but I can get some of you first. And they said, they did a turn. They said, oh, Ned. Oh, come on. We just wanted to talk.
So and I hope that everyone is sort of fully present in the situational setup here. He's a black man.
Late at night.
In
the back of a general store in Coffeyville, Mississippi.
So these things often, end with someone, not one of those men hanging from a tree.
Well, what happened was my grandfather went back and left town that night.
Oh, wow. Because he had no choice.
He had no choice. A couple of the men came by the house. Was it that night or the next day? I'm not sure. And they said, Eldora, that's my grandmother, Ned, she said, Ned basically has made it impossible for any of you to stay, was the point. Wow. She said, yes, we're getting ready to leave. The night that my grandfather left, a group of his black friends kind of kept watch around the house, which was great. They made contact. They had a few weeks with friends in Denver. They went there. Subsequently, they moved to Los Angeles for several reasons. Probably the most significant being, my grandfather could build a certain kind of house in LA that they weren't using the same materials in Denver, but the aunt, the school teacher, had investigated the school system, and she said the elementary, the high schools, and the public universities, that be USC, if you could get to Berkeley, it was UCLA, they're much better than in Colorado. We're going to California. And they did. The first night, why is this woman laughing? Because sometimes you must. They bought a little house in what my father describes as a nice little working class neighborhood.
And this is in California?
In California, in Los Angeles. And the night that they moved in, someone burned a cross on their lawn.
Whoa.
And my grandfather, still peppery, sat up that night with
this
with
was
a gun.
In the book. I remember this.
Yeah, that was there. My father ultimately he went to medical school. I won't get into everything. He was supposed to go to the University of Southern California medical school. They was just starting it. Everyone who had a certain grade point average, who was pre-med, they'd been told would be accepted. He came back from his summer job, and he and a very good white friend went to look on the list, and my father's name wasn't there. So he and his friends said, well, we'll go talk to the dean. They got into the dean's office. The dean said to his friend, Mr. I'm forgetting, Feldman, I think, would you leave? Mr. Jefferson, I want to talk. The white friend left. The dean said, you can't come here. You were qualified. You can't. I have letters ready. Now, this is the end of the summer. School starts in September. I have letters ready. You can go to Howard or Meharry. And my father said, fine, I'll go to Meharry. And he did. He subsequently moved to Chicago because Chicago had the oldest black hospital and one of the best, Provident, in the country. Yeah. And LA's hospital was not that good.
So in Chicago now, your father and your mother have 2 children.
They have 2 children. They marry in the early 40s.
Okay, and your sister.
My sister's 3 years older than I am, and for those of you, is anyone here? Can't see. I'm not going. For those of you who are modern dance fans, my sister began in ballet. She was very talented. This was not only pre-Misty Copeland. This was several generations who preceded Misty Copeland, and had very few opportunities. Raven Wilkinson, Betty Nichols, Lavinia Williams, many of them ended up going into modern dance, as my sister did. Martha Graham was her initial passion, then Donald McHale, and she ended up as the director of the Alvin Ailey School.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Underachievers, the whole lot.
And really furnished. Well, something, about these 2 little girls were, and I do have to say, despite certain very gendered things like, we're so not good in math, and science, no, which still seems to be something that young girls of all races are somehow ground into. My father my parents did not feel that any black mind or psyche should be wasted. So they were very set, despite our also getting the language, the constructions about you married, you have your kids, but you have your career. Not only college, you go to graduate school.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And if you wanted to be an artist, with my sister, she did perform before making a mismatch of the marriage. But we were also told, no, you do not. You get that master's degree first. Then you can really think about performing full time.
So
they were a little rigid in that way, I would say.
Hey, maybe they were clairvoyant, is in seeing into the future and what we now know as reality.
Okay.
Or maybe you all will find out in a few years.
Ooh, ouch.
Start figuring out the loans and the. But so now in Chicago, you all find yourselves in a community of other Black professionals and children of Black professionals.
Yes.
And you deem this community Negroland.
Well, I do.
Okay.
And I will explain exactly why. And I'll even read a little bit.
Okay.
I partly wanted Negroland. I know you all have grown up with what? African American? Largely? What was the term? What was considered the most respectable term when you were growing
So I am multiple generations. I feel 500 generations ahead of the students, the undergrad students in this room. But I think sort of culturally, I operate in their moment.
Ooh, that got more complex than I expected. I like it. Okay.
Culturally, I nay through their moment, and I would say that. African American is a term that is used by non-African American people in an effort to be respectful. But intraculturally, we more than not use Black.
Still, there was a period when
we use a lot of words.
A lot of young Blacks were using African American, and I would start to feel a little silly if I was using Black. But this is a great relief to me.
Yeah,
it is. But the moment of political awakening for me was black. But that was with the 60s.
Okay.
The respectable term across, came up through Malcolm X, who began to shift it. The respectable, honored term was Negro.
Okay.
With a capital N.
So, in
not-
other words, are you saying Dr. Martin Luther King would have been using Negro?
He was.
And Malcolm X shifted
would
black
use
into
both,
the
and he
diet.
started
Okay.
to shift it towards black, but it was really, Malcolm X died very young. It was really the Black Power movement in the late 60s, as it was taken up, by SNCC, Stokely Carmichael, etc., that black became ultra popular.
Which is an interesting thing that you elucidate in terms of how, in this moment, we are seeing very different appraisals of the Black Panther Party's cultural sort of navigations, and how some people say, oh, they were a community organizing group, and other people see them as radical militant terrorists, and how the word black in that name might function culturally in different manners for different people.
It functioned in a culturally incendiary,
Wow.
exciting incendiary way. Just to go back to Negroland, I really wanted it to signify a particular historical and mythological space, which it really does. It's that space kind of starting. It had been colored before that. Briefly, even Afro-American, AFRAMERIC.
That one, when I read that, I had never heard that.
James Weldon Johnson helped popularize that. Then Negro, labor unions, civil rights leaders, capital N. So I wanted to signify that I was really writing about a cultural, a social, a political time that was basically the 40s, 50s, and early, kind of cut off at 66. I used land because, a land is a very specific thing, but also certainly in black history, but in all history, land too has this kind of, symbolic, mythological resonance. Your homeland, the land of my heart. It can be an internal space.
Especially
as much
in
as
the
anything
notion
else.
of, for better or worse, the nature of America's narrative, land and the consumption of land. And
Exactly.
it's important.
And segregation, Negroland. We were always living in a very particular kinds of black Negro space within the larger white world.
Will you read for us the memoir's opening that
I
sort
will.
of really is where you define this Negroland concept?
I do. Thank you. I was taught to avoid showing off. I was taught to distinguish myself through presentation, not declaration, to excel through deeds and manners, not showing off. But isn't all memoir a form of showing off? In my Negroland childhood, this was a perilous business. Negroland is my name for a small region of Negro America, where residents were sheltered by a certain amount of privilege and plenty. Children in Negroland were warned that few Negroes enjoyed privilege or plenty, and that most whites would be glad to see them return to indigence, deference, and subservience. Children there were taught that most other Negroes ought to be emulating us, when too many of them, out of envy or ignorance, went on behaving in ways that encouraged racial prejudice. Too many Negroes, it was said, showed off the wrong things. Loud voices, their brash and garish ways, their gift for popular music and dance, for sports rather than the humanities and sciences. Most white people were on the lookout, we were told, for what they called these basic racial traits. But most white people were also on the lookout for a too bold display by us of their kind of accomplishments, their privilege and plenty, what they considered their racial traits. You were never to act undignified in their presence, but neither were you to act flamboyant. Showing off was permitted, even encouraged, only if the result reflected well on your family, their friends, and your collective ancestors. So there's so much prohibition going on within two paragraphs. I've moved from possibly a somewhat sympathetic narrator to possibly a revolting one, airing those really distasteful, rigid snobberies. and one keeps trying to unfold and have these parts, talk to one another. Also that sense of prohibition, of a forbidden that accompanies every privilege.
I want to ask you a bit about that, because at one point in the book, you sort of assess yourself as both fully compliant with the doctrines of Negroland, but in ways you assess yourself as a dissenter. And I think in the writing process, there's a unique sort of honesty that you have to come to there. Can you talk a bit about how you embarked initially upon the journey of writing about yourself?
Yes,
have you
okay.
always journaled? Have you?
No.
Did you keep a diary?
No. I have gone through periods where I have kept diaries,
Like as a child, you kept a
As a
diary?
child, I did a lot of that creative writing that many children do. Sometimes I think if I have to read one more thing from a writer who said, of course I always wrote little poems and stories when I was little. We all did. So that I always did. And in my school, like in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, and then on through, we had to write these little almost essays, I would call them, personal essays. So, you'd write little confessions about, I want to be seen. I remember in 5th grade writing some heartfelt thing about, I'm seen as such a vivacious, that was not the word I used, I wasn't that precocious. I'm seen as such a vivacious, vigorous, social person. I'm very sensitive, I have mood. I wish people would understand this. I love nature. But I think really what happened when I really decided to be a writer, I'd always taken writing well for granted, actually.
Okay.
And my first impulses had been towards being a pianist and then towards being an actor.
Okay.
After I lost interest in piano fairly quickly because it was kind of forced on me. Oh, this is her talent, and I didn't love it all that much, and I was good. It was a nice talent, but it was not. And acting, the life was not for me. I really could not.
The money was probably
that was it, but also
Not
that constant everyday threat of rejection,
Oh,
and that sense that I did not have as clear a sense in writing as I did in acting of the racial limits also on the roles you could get.
Sorry, you're saying that in
writing
space,
I had more of a sense that there's a little maneuvering room here. Than the clear visibility of the limits on the ambitions and the careers of most black women. So I didn't have a lot of taste for any of that.
When did Negroland begin as
memoir? That's what you were asking me. Yes.
Tell me about that.
Okay. The last number of years. I was at the Times for 13 years. I'd been a critic since the 70s, and I really started to get resistant to, tired of, though I still love criticism, the confinements as a writer. There's certain things, certainly at a newspaper or a news magazine, that your voice is just not allowed to do. There's not. Maybe the piece is 700 words and you wrote it the night before. There's always a form of almost universalized authority that you are, you're always in some way an omniscient narrator. You really are. And there are a lot of things you don't get to do as a writer that are fun, like use a lot of dialogue, like write scenes, like really examine the authority of being vulnerable, uncertain, of being contradictory, of saying, I felt this last night when I saw this piece. Maybe I don't understand it, and now I feel this. Just a lot, there's a lot that's closed to your emotional and intellectual palate. And I started to really get tired of that. I had been writing what I now realize were pieces of memoir that I kept calling short stories.
Okay.
And I've been doing that since the 70s.
Were you publishing them?
No, I wasn't even submitting them.
Wow.
No, I was just
Showing them
I
to...
write. No, nobody.
Wow.
I write and rewrite and be unhappy and then rewrite again and then I buried them away. But
Okay.
they stayed there.
I'm gonna
I
keep
wrote
needling.
a couple of almost theatrical-like pieces, buried those, though much later, parts of Negroland became a solo theater piece that I did. Those were some of the first versions of Negroland that I did in like 2002.
So I'm fascinated by this. Do you write at a laptop?
Yes, but I also do
Handwriting.
longhand. Yeah,
Do
I do
you-
longhand. I often go to, when I was working on this book, and I realized, okay, I've gotten far enough so I will finish it, but I'm still struggling. I would go to a cafe every morning. The nice thing about cafes, as I'm sure some of you know, I don't know if you write in one, there is that anonymity thing.
Yes,
If you're
yes.
alone in your room, everything in the atmosphere is saying, what are you writing? You know? But I take a notebook, and at a certain point, it made me happiest to take music paper.
Okay.
An old book of music paper, and I would set myself a kind of improv exercise, prompts we call them now, that had to do with a section of the book that I was working on, just to almost to catch myself unaware. But as with hopefully improv that turns out well, since it had something to do with stuff I was doing, I was still drawing on craft that was inside me. You know,
Okay.
I had technique that I could bring this improv onto.
Now, in terms of the writing process, one of the most fascinating elements of this book is how it elucidates elements of Black history that go unrecorded by, our mainstream academic history channel, history texts. There's a lot of explanation.
Book channels, yeah, they
Yeah.
are, it's true.
There's a lot of explanation of formations, antebellum formations, that I look back at all of my elementary school history and high school history and say, I've never heard any of this, and I probably should have, because this is probably the stuff that's the most relevant to me.
But what are you thinking of? Like Mary McLeod Bethune and people
From your
like
book?
that? Yeah.
I'm
yeah.
thinking of the, specifically sort of the narratives of post-slavery, how land was obtained,
Okay, yes.
how illicit children got sort of tucked away
that-
into folds and sort of given hush money of property
Absolutely.
and means.
Absolutely. Oh, yes, and that whole section where at the
Yeah.
roots of Negroland, yes.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the strategies for research that you took
Right.
in terms of building the factual element of
Okay.
those?
There is a whole section. I won't presume, as an arrogant author, that everyone here has read this book. There is a section. It's a long section where I really chronicle what I call the history and elements of politics, sociology, psychology, the rise of this this class, and it really starts. I really guess, I'll just give you an example. Here are some of the group's founding categories, the oppositions and distinctions they came to live by. Northerner, Southerner, house slave, field hand, free black, slave black, free mulatto, skilled worker, unskilled worker, free or slave, owns property, owns none, reads and writes fluently, reads a little but does not write, reads and writes a little, neither reads nor writes, descends from African and Indian royalty, descends from African obscurities, descends from upper class whites, descends from lower class whites, descends from no whites at all, etc. And then I talk about how, how this group is chronicled by certain people, and actually the first chroniclers, in a certain way, the first aristocrats, if we use the word in a creative way, were actually the escaped slaves,
Okay.
like Harriet Jacobs or Frederick Douglass, who lived to tell the tale, broke away from slavery, became literate, left their record, and actually most of them began one of the most honorable traditions in Negroland, which is, really fighting for freedom of blacks as a whole. But research. I have reams of Black history books, starting with the 60s and starting from the 60s and 70s on my shelf. So, some of it some of this I knew, and I knew what I had to refresh myself on. There are certain books that are actual straight chronicles of the Black bourgeoisie or the Black elite. There were some books that were very specialized that were helpful, like, a portrait by an American historian of a particular free Black family in South Carolina that made machines, for cotton, and that owned slaves.
Do you think
that was useful?
Do you think you had consciously or not been preparing to write this book?
I think, yes, consciously and not, both. I also, by the way, had loads and loads and loads of old ebony and jet, because you have to do the popular media history as well. So, lots of more serious, sober books and lots of popular stuff. Yeah, I think so, partly because I did that theater piece in 2002. It had started to creep into pieces that even pieces of criticism. I would find a way to allude to this world or to my experience in it. People started dying.
Okay.
My parents' generation, some of my mother's friends,
so
had a white father or grandfather who would put them through Spelman or whatever. These experiences had been passed on to me, and yet all these people were dying. So this was important to me, and I was an adult, so they'd tell you stories, not only stories on themselves, gossip, which is a form of history.
My favorite.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. But they tell you, they just tell you a lot of secrets that you hadn't gotten before, including, some of them were painful race stories, some of them were just interesting, like, who had a twin brother who was passing, and or some pretty well-known woman band leader, who it turned out, everyone thought she was white. Bette Midler was going to make a movie based on her life, and my mother and a group of my mother's friends had known her as a very pale, blonde, little Negro girl in Chicago. Wow. So the movie never got made. But here's an interesting thing, and these rituals are part of what go into your work. I said to my mother, I think I'm going to write a story about, I named this woman, and revealed that she was Black. And my mother looked at me and she said, "Why would you do that?" She said she might have family who don't know. Why would you presume to unravel her life? There were certain rules and rituals, even that you obeyed. So taking all this in, realizing that I had this and that it needed to be remembered somehow, which is why I think of it as a personal but also a cultural memoir.
Yeah. It certainly, I think, acts as a clearinghouse for not just your stories, but a community stories, and at times a generation stories.
Yeah, which I think we all have much more than we're aware of. These, the imprint of a community, of a geography, internal and external, don't you think?
Yes, certainly. Yeah. There's something that in what you've been speaking about has just sort of, I had a little aha, and I'm interested in sharing that, is that you embarked upon this at a certain point as a formal project. But prior to that, you were doing little projects that made this possible. Yeah, and I think as student writers, that's something to consider, is that we don't necessarily have to launch the large-scale project to launch the little projects.
Sometimes the large-scale project can absolutely paralyze you.
Yeah.
It becomes impossible to conceive of. You often go with what is intriguing to you and what galvanizes your work on the page. Keep it all, because it will start to make a pattern.
Yeah.
But absolutely, absolutely. That's the only way you find out what you do well, what you have to work harder at, but also what excites you, what you can't resist, because writing is so much about resistance. So find the things that you don't want to resist.
One of the things that you were just speaking about, that the book sort of gives for lack of a better term, it gives a human face to. So the notion of passing is something that, as a Black American person, it comes up culturally, and it can seem so abstract and at times insane.
And precious, too.
And precious. Something you want to dance around. Maybe even in my generation, it's something that's kind of viewed comedically as like a... But
that's interesting, because in earlier generations, it was also a steady source of eros. Too,
yeah.
Right? You can always count on that erotic, exciting, you could be white.
But I think it's something that's complicated by, in a very contemporary notion, how in this moment we are really redefining how we assess race in many spaces of identity.
Yes.
We now have terms like intersectionality, which
Yes.
at a place like Brown you hear more often than ratty. And not to trivialize it, but to say,
right.
I think for you in the book you speak about, while being at Brandeis and studying, how you navigated becoming very compelled by pro-Black ideologies.
Yes.
And pro-feminist ideologies.
Well, a little bit sequential.
Okay.
I was at Brandeis, my college years was 64 to 68. So I hit civil rights, moving into Black power, which was very masculinist.
Okay.
It did not stop us from worshiping at the
Okay.
shrine. And, there was much that was deeply honorable and exciting, but that's what it was. The feminism, white, Black, and every other kind, it was just starting to make its presence felt in 69, really. There had been some activists, again, across lots of racial lines, earlier, but, of the second wave, but they weren't getting any real attention. It really started, consciousness raising groups and all of this. It really started in 69, 70. So it just dealt us, one of those amazing shocks. Like, wait a minute, I've been reading this, was it Ron Karenga's, rules for how Black women were supposed to behave in a truly African setting. You busy, the one line I remember, you kept your head down, you sat, you cooked, and you busied yourself with knitting, sewing, or something.
And now, can you tell me a bit about that text? I'm not familiar with it.
I can't remember it very clearly.
Or just the name of it, and I'm not even...
I'll have to look it up for
Okay.
you.
But
it was something, it was a text that was sort of the...
And this was in sort of...
It would have been in a book like...
being engaged in sort of a Black nationalism?
Absolutely.
Sort of? Okay.
It was very definitely a Black nationalist text.
And it's sort of...
I probably had it in an anthology.
And in this, there was a positing of women in a deferential space to men.
Utterly. Absolutely. Okay. With a bogus positing, I'm not saying there isn't plenty of sexism in Africa, there is, but with a bogus... You see, this is really the African way. This fake utopian.
So, yeah.
The justification really comes from this pure notion, the motherland and Blackness.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, tell me then...
Well, feminism was very complicated, because feminism emerged largely as a middle-class white phenomenon.
Yes.
And for Black feminists to make and fight their way into their own space meant contending both with the sexism, the misogyny of many Black men, and the racism, this, of many white women. And of course the class assumptions that, within our own ranks too. So that, it was hard. You were on the defense a lot.
So you're at Brandeis and subsequently right after. While you were there other black women with whom you sort of, you threw the ball back and forth with about these things?
Well, I'll tell you something rather embarrassing. The incident I remember most clearly was a group of us, male and female, had founded the Black Students Organization. And about 4 or 5 women, I among them, we got together and we decided that for the next year, we had to pick a black male president. Now, why I'm particularly ashamed of this was we were we knew we had to do this, but we were also condescending. We said, well, he doesn't have to be particularly smart. We can tell him what to do. So we were very angry, obviously, but we still felt we had to do this. We picked someone who was perfectly bright and
This was my one chance to run.
but he was a few years, at least a year, possibly 2 years younger than several of us. So, we kind of thought we could manipulate him.
Oh, okay.
It was all from every angle.
Was it
in
because you
such
thought that
bad
having
faith.
a black male leader would result in...
It would give him more credibility, more
credibility.
respectability,
Okay.
absolutely.
Wow.
And we also felt that, we would be called, castrating black women if we didn't do that. That rhetoric was already beginning.
Now, when do you feel that, or can you talk a little bit about beginning to sort of pick from these ideological sort of schools of thought what was working for you and put together your own?
Well, I sure didn't do it alone.
Okay.
Your question about did you and other women start talking, because I moved to New York in 1969. A few years later, the National Black Feminist Organization started,
Did work
which I helped
take
start.
you to New York?
Yeah. Well, work took me to New York. I felt I'm through with Cambridge, but I'd always wanted to live in New York. So I thought, I didn't find a glamorous job at first. I was a secretary at Planned Parenthood.
But you
was
certainly found a
respectable.
historic
It was respectable,
job.
yes. But that's what most, if you were a middle class girl of just about any race and you had a nice little resume and you spoke well, you were going to be a secretary or an editorial assistant.
But a secretary at Planned Parenthood...
Planned Parenthood made it more interesting.
This is like the birth of the pill.
Yeah. Well, the pill had been birthed a few years earlier.
Okay.
I can still remember the first woman on my dorm floor in 1964 who came back with the pill, with the birth control pill. These are indelible moments. They
There are
really,
analogs today.
Yeah,
We
of
all
course
know
there
the
are.
dorm.
Yeah. That's when 1970 was pivotal because it was still the 60s, but there were a lot of consequences then. The next year, I was in graduate school. Angela Davis got arrested. The Soledad brothers happened. Everything was still deeply tempestuous, but Black power had, feminism had come. Gay rights, as we called it then, was early 70s, making its way. So, there were enormous numbers of people you could suddenly talk to, and argue this through and talk it over and say, I feel guilty about this or about that, or I'm struggling and, I can't belong to an all-white consciousness raising group. Let's come up with a black consciousness raising group. But, I'm not going to, in the 60s, at a brief point, I stopped talking to most of my white friends because it was Black power. But I was also just depressed and angry. So I thought, well, this is a good, these two things can work together for me. So, you were constantly trying to recalibrate, I acted that way last year. I want to do it differently now. It was very, very exciting.
I feel is
we
one
were
of
questing. We really were.
I feel like this is one of the elements of your memoir that is most dynamic, is that I feel like these are the black identities that in a space like Brown, we all are very familiar with. These are our friends, but we see these identities so rarely depicted in media. There's
there's also this question of, I hope we started to look more also at just how you navigate and mediate these identities. Is it always that, different situations call out different parts of you, and that can be hypocritical, but it isn't always.
Can you, speaking of calling out different parts of someone, can you read the passage about your friend George? Because I feel like it elucidates a Black woman's experience that is underrepresented in contemporary media.
This is from a little section that I call a series of relativity tales, which is really just, what I call the circumnavigating of race, class, and gender, and how in some ways it made for comedy.
And this is after you studied at college. This is when you're in New York.
This is after I've gone to college. This is after I've, gone through major mood swing depression, thought about, kind of made a cult of literary suicide, and found, well, here I am. This circumnavigating, those of us who survived, of race, class, and gender made for comedy too. Comic chagrin, comic relief, comic reversals, at least adjustments of fortune. Sometimes we felt like postmodern topsy-turvy dolls. So this is from the 80s, this little section that Kibwe asked me to read. George and I have been friends since the early 70s. Wait, I'm going to start again. My props are not helping me here. All right. George and I have been friends since the early 70s. He's gay and handsome in a manly Western Protestant way, the Gary Cooper way, with a head of healthy chestnut hair that falls lightly over his left brow, craggy yet refined features, a lean body fit for tailored khakis and button-down shirts or tight blue Levi's with black bomber jackets. He was my first close gay friend, and I was his first close Black friend, which led to confusions we cherish, which has led to confusions we cherish. I switched to the present tense. When we go to largely heterosexual parties together, white women drawn to him give me appraising or irritated looks, then move in. When we pass gay white men on the street, they cut me and give him smoldering glances. When we pass gay Black men on the street, they shoot me a "girlfriend, you should know better" look, and then turn to him with a sly smile or playful moo. And when we pass heterosexual Black men on the street, they narrow their eyes at me and mutter or sneer, "What do you need that white man for, sister?" That's it.
I found this passage to be super, super fascinating and super, super honest in a way that I feel like goes under-depicted. We don't see these elements of our experience, however we feel about these elements of our experience depicted. And it was something to me that was a consistent, enriching part of your memoir, sort of was those parts of our day-to-day lives that become so, they have weight to them. They're minor things, but they have weight.
They do, and they can add up.
They add up.
A story I didn't tell about George, I think it was the same party that these various women were hitting on him. George knew how much I hated the Rolling Stones song Brown Sugar.
Okay.
And some very, kind of big, preppy guy put it on the record player at that same party we were at, and George marched over to the record player and took it off. It came on again. I took it off. It was a major gesture. Okay.
So test all of your friends on wrist and quad. See if they will turn off Taylor Swift when you go to a party and you don't want to hear it. Test them.
It's funny.
One of the elements of our contemporary experience that I feel is related to your experience while in college is right now we are in this moment of organizing around, of course, Black Lives Matter. And I think those of us in environments like Brown begin to wonder how, as we sit in a level of, if not socioeconomic, experiential privilege, we are often on a campus, we feel in some ways, hopefully, somewhat safe. what role are we to play in the call to action of a movement like Black Lives Matter? Can you talk about how you feel the Negroland citizens of your moment engaged with the civil rights to Black Power movement? And what are some of your thoughts on this moment?
Well, I think we took many, many paths. Some Negrolanders became, real, hardcore leftists. There were some old communist socialists. There were some absolute Black Power radicals. Kathleen Cleaver, actually, is from, I think it's a Washington, D.C. version of Negroland. Yeah. Others of us...
And you felt there was space within that community for the radical?
Look, we were in a state of, my generation, to embrace this move from civil rights to Black Power. And then, to follow it up with also feminism, gay rights, etc. There was a huge generation clash. If you go back and, kind of get into not just the serious history, but the journalism of that area, you'll see thousands of stories about the uproar, the clash between parents and children, Black parents, Black children, white parents, white children, over the new left, Black Power, militants. The counterculture is a namby-pamby word, but this was major contra. Counter, against, we thought, my generation, we thought we were absolutely, a lot of people thought the revolution was coming and we were going to change the world. It sounds pretentious, and I can't say we lived up to it. It was pretentious in many ways.
It's going on again. A lot of people think the revolution is coming right now.
Yeah, exactly. And we needed to think that. So, you fought. There were always some radical parents, but basically, the ones who... It was a generation
that moved to a new space.
Absolutely. We did many different things. Some people, lived out that period briefly and then went back to, a predictable bourgeois life. Others of us have tried to blend our privilege with... actions and active viewpoints, depending on our profession, that are progressive, that are strong-willed, that we hope advance the conversation. I think you do. I don't want to talk in generalities. You have to analyze your own circumstances really clearly, who you are. What privilege you're willing to give up, what privilege you don't want to give up, how you can re-navigate privilege, how you can use it in different ways. One thing that interests me about the two movements, in a sense, involving Blacks that are getting the most general attention, Black Lives Matter, which in general, is associated with, the horrors of Black men and some Black women being murdered by
police brutality.
Police brutality. Back. Always there, but back in the public consciousness. But the other movement that is getting huge amounts of attention and debate is the set of movements on campuses at schools like Brown, Yale. I'm going to Brandeis next week. I know there were big demonstrations there. Michigan, everywhere, where students are, in fact, lobbying for changes within the university. Now, these are, in many cases, very worthy changes. Princeton as well, but they are taking place in a very privileged space. And I've noticed that while there's a certain respectful distance towards Black Lives Matter, meaning a lot of journalists and commentators and pundits want to sound very respectful, even if they think, they feel respect up to a point. There is more freedom of condescension around the college protests. There are a lot of statements from older writers, public intellectuals, pundits saying, well, you know, I read the other day someone saying, well, if you can't change the world, try to change the name of a building. You know, This clearly comes from, you know, the fact that the new left, my generation, failed, and people do understand that there's not a lot of change they can make, so try to change a building. There's a lot of patronization, you know, as if it's, you all are doing, people are saying, well, you all are doing just fine, you know, don't fuss so much. So I would say one of the things to look at, to really try to examine, is what are the relationships between, you know, the central subject dynamic of Black Lives Matter and the central movements dynamic subjects of changes you want on campus. How can these worlds be in a more textured conversation? How can you make that conversation, because it's not being made?
I definitely am thrilled that you encourage students to shape the conversations themselves, as opposed to have the conversations shape their response.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, always, I'd say the thing that it's always good to ask yourself is, what isn't being said? Either about the movement that I'm a part of, or about, let's say, Black Lives Matter and its documentation. The other day I read at a fairly obscure website.
I'm sorry, Margo, just for a second. Can our ushers now head to the sides? And as soon as Margo concludes this comment, we will open it up for audience questions. Sorry.
Anyway, I'll make this quick, but an article had been posted on an obscure website by a Black leftist critiquing the leadership privilege of a lot of the, as he said, Black Lives Matter people. He said, we have to be very careful that the leaders, today's leaders, don't end up, as generations of certain Black leaders in the past had, getting the cushy jobs on Hillary or Bernie's campaign, you know, moving into positions of high power that separate them, in fact, from the people who are out in these communities, living in them, demonstrating every day. I had not really thought of that. I don't quite know.
Well, I have to say, in an era of Twitter, I think that they would have a difficult time getting away with it the way they have in previous generations.
In large numbers, I think so. But I thought, interesting warning. Yeah.
So, audience members, please raise your hands. I will have one of the ushers with the mic head to you so that we can capture your questions on the video recording of the event.
Yeah, and we've been ranging far and wide, but, you know, feel free to, you know, touch on things we haven't.
And if not, I have a slew of questions that I know I can ask, but I feel like as much as I enjoy the sound of my voice, I'm far more intrigued by yours. Well, here's what I would...
You know what, people will start at a certain
Here's what I
point
wanted to
yeah.
touch on. So you have written, previous to Negroland,
Michael,
and really dynamic sort of exploration of not just Michael Jackson's narrative, but really how he functions as a product.
As a product, as a representation, as a symbol, as a site, as we like to say, of race, gender, childhood, you know, contention, obsession.
And this previous September, you wrote for, this is a weighty issue, I must say, I'm going to try to work out here, the September issue cover of American Vogue on Beyonce Knowles. Who's on your hit list? Who is a pop media persona that you are as stimulated by sort of interrogating in this man? Who?
You know, there isn't right now, and I'm not proud of that. I'm waiting for one to emerge because the next step is often, if you're my generation, you know, some kind of presumed, well, they just don't make them like they used to. You know? And I don't feel that. I just haven't been grabbed in the same way. Someone did say to me, and I have a lot, I like Beyonce. I have a lot of fun thinking about her, but a friend said to me, oh, I've got your next book. You know, you did Michael Jackson and then you did Negroland, you can do Beyonce. And I thought, I don't know that it might be that I would feel I was repeating a form, but
Fair.
I'm not, I was really, obsessed with Michael Jackson, and not happily so always, because he went through some agonies and some things that created agonies for us, but I utterly adored him. And I was in my 20s when he emerged with the Jackson 5. I adored him for years. I thought he was with his team, and he did have a team, and his work ethic and his just uncanny talent. I really did think that he was a genius.
I mean, I think you are definitely right in that there might not be people that have as ubiquitous a recognized star power. There's some, and I would say...
Who's on your hit list? Because the thing is
Well,
also
my hit
who
list for-
obsesses you, not who's a genius.
My hit list for you, because I feel...
Oh, okay.
I would love to read your writing on Kanye West. I feel like you could
have to go back and listen
definitely
to everything, but he's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah,
I feel like
he's
you could
interesting.
definitely, through the sort of research you do, connect some dots that might be eluding me.
Thank you for that.
And I am also interested in, perhaps outside of the music space, I would love, depending on where things go, I am really fascinated about someone writing critically about Shonda Rhimes' trajectory.
Yeah, now that is
because it's
interesting.
a lot of
Yes.
industry like navigation that we don't, from the outside, we think, oh, she's got shows, and how that comes to be for someone like her in her identity space is pretty, and of course Oprah,
Yeah.
Oprah.
Yes. I will tell you all a funny story.
She's here?
Oprah story. Yeah, she's here. This is an Oprah magic moment. I did a brief stint when Oprah restarted up her book club again. I did a brief stint as the website literary kind of advisor, but it was almost like, Abigail Van Buren advice column.
Okay.
For what is the name of that John Steinbeck novel? East of Eden, the one James Dean was so gorgeous in. So basically, people would submit a certain number of questions about the book as a literary thing, and I would answer them each week. I got this through, I was recommended by my editor at Pantheon, very smart guy named Errol McDonald, who had, I think, worked with Oprah. So I had to go to Chicago for an audition, basically. And I was sitting in the townhouse that is Oprah's studio, Harpo, and I was standing up and kind of waiting, and suddenly I noticed that she was small at that moment, short woman had kind of come towards me, and she was in jeans and a little shirt, and I was kind of looking around, and I looked. And I realized it was Oprah, and I said, oh, "It's you." And she went, and I do not think she went. It's you. And the thing that was so amazing, because I'm telling this now with, it's you. When she said it, she is such a good performer in that moment that I basically internally went, "It's me."
It's you.
And I then recognized my own. It was phenomenal.
Listen, that is a deity
It's she.
acknowledging your presence, so you feel it.
Yeah, but she started with just, I'm just going to sneak up on her, really quietly. Then I'm going to hit her with the godlike thing.
I'm still looking, so if anyone,
People come on, I know some.
Why don't we start here, and then if someone from this side wouldn't mind making it to this lady with the mic, and we'll go this question to then this question.
Hi. Oh,
Please say your name and your year.
Okay, my name's Sabrina, and I'm a senior. And Ms. Jefferson, I was recently listening to a podcast interview that you did with Longform.
Oh, yeah.
And you were talking about how...
The mic.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
And you were talking about how, like, when you were entering the industry, you kind of, if I recall correctly, wrote something about rock and roll, and that kind of like catapulted you into writing. And I was wondering if you had any advice for young women or people of color who are looking to enter like magazine writing or writing in general, about how is the way to do that.
This was a piece that I had originally written a version of when I was in graduate school at Columbia, their J school. Then I submitted it to Harper's because J School is like you join temporarily an old boy network, which is always useful to remember. I submitted it to an editor at Harper's who felt, she said, it's very well written, but this was in 1970, 71. Rock and roll is not a serious subject. And it was really about the race dynamics of rock and roll and, you know, the ways in which it was a minstrel show and the ways in which it wasn't. I resubmitted it about a year later to another editor who published it. In that case, I would say it was a good piece, but I had the luck of certain contacts, and it was really kind of that Columbia network.
Right place, right time.
Yeah, so I won't say that, you know, if you have internships can be of use. Teachers, writing teachers, who, you know, you can get recommendations from. I would also say in a more straightforward way, really follow online, you know, offline, whatever, the publications that you really, that you like, that excite you, that you respect. Analyze what it is, you know, what kinds of pieces they run, what range of voices they've got, and, you know, query them, you know, send them story proposals, not so wordy that they can steal them, but, you know, tailor your story ideas to what you see they're not doing, but you do it, you know, what they do well, but the particular subject that they're not doing yet.
Sabrina, it's a very, very, very apropos question, and actually tomorrow morning we have some spaces left. We are going to have an hour with Margo where we basically speak precisely about that. But before that, we're going to speak a bit about writing here at school in an academic context about pop media, how you can engage the pop in your academic writing, and then also how to think about crafting portfolios of writing to pitch to publications. It's 9 o'clock here at Grand Option Studio One. Please, if you'd like to continue that convo. So then I think our next question is for this lady here, and we're just going to bring you the mic. Please say your name, and if you're a student, what you're studying. If you're a guest, then.
Wow, I don't look like a student to you?
You
Thanks
do.
A lot.
You do look like a student. I have to be honest. You have the sophistication and confidence of a grad student.
Oh, thank you.
The sophistication and confidence of a grad student.
I'm Kimberly, and I'm a staff member here.
Wonderful.
So 2 quick things. One, I want to add Prince to your hit list.
Yeah.
Prince is something.
Or Symbol, if wherever he's at in the nation.
Fascinating personality.
Recently, Afro wig, the Angela Davis Afro, yeah.
So I searched for you on Twitter. I couldn't find you on Twitter.
No, you know, I don't tweet yet.
How do you use social media?
I follow a lot of tweets, but I don't tweet. Isn't that terrible? That's like being a voyeur, yeah. You know, I don't use it that much yet. I still do Facebook, but I'm glad you asked and embarrassed me publicly. Called me up publicly, because I'm actually about to start doing this much more. I'm
Well, you know, you can't use Twitter and now have an Instagram. You can't have Instagram and now have a Snapchat.
I can do Instagram.
You can't have a Vine and not have a Medium.
No, wait.
You can't have a Medium and not have a Tumblr.
I can't do all of that. So what are the absolute essential ones?
I think
Twitter and Instagram.
For you, I think Twitter, because you're a writer. I think because you turn a look quite well, you needed Instagram to selfie it up and, you know, get some free shoes from people that, you know, why not? But I think those.
Facebook nobody cares about anymore. I'm aware of it. Now, my sense is also nobody cares about blogs anymore. Is this true?
Please,
Because this
anyone that has
also,
perspective
Sabrina,
on it.
is, I'm not sure. If people, it's amazing what attention people get doing something interesting on Instagram. for
There's a
example,
new
these
platform
days.
called Medium that is attempting to create a space for longer length writing.
That's right.
Yeah,
There is.
and a lot of people are using it when they need to post something that they don't want to sort of be dismissed. It's not the character length of Twitter, so there's
Yeah.
something there.
Okay.
Other questions?
Can I ask a follow-up
sorry,
really
sorry,
quickly?
sorry.
So in relation to that,
Yeah.
I found that Twitter has become a really great space for activism, especially people talk of this black activism,
Yes.
black Twitter. And
It is.
so
This is why I follow. I find out things. Also, there are wonderful, real aphorisms and great one-liners that have to do with, with emotional politics as well as real politics and black attitudes. Yeah. You know what? It's a skill like anything else. So I'm not just going to suddenly start, hi, I'm Margo. I want to think about doing it well. So thank you for
I'll
that.
look for you.
Okay.
Margo, thank you so much. I hate to be the microphone police, but we don't want to miss your great
Oh, I'm
words of
sorry.
wisdom
Okay.
on the
That's
video
very nice.
capture. So,
Thank you for that.
Other
Okay.
questions? So let's do this gentleman and then this young lady in the cap.
Hi, my name is DeAndre. I'm actually a PhD student here in the Africana Studies Department.
Okay.
And my
The
question
PhD Africana program didn't exist when I graduated in 2010, so congratulations on being a
in
pioneer.
the first Black Studies, which is what they were called, courses in colleges really started in the mid-60s. It's amazing, yeah.
Well, I really had a question about your Negroland concept, especially having spent undergrad in Atlanta at Morehouse. And-
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So I really just want to know, in this sort of mythic community that you've imagined, what would you say is the capital? Does Negroland have a capital? Is there a hub for that particular kind of culture?
You don't want you don't want the cat fights and dog fights that get settled. Historically, in many ways, Washington D.C. was considered one of the first hubs because people like, Frederick Douglass getting government jobs and very, Negroes from old prestigious families right after the Civil War were settling there. Also, some of the first black lawmakers were there. But there was Atlanta, my Chicago, no. Certain southern cities argue with each other about it. For a time, Cincinnati was important. It really kind of shifts with the decades. There's also a debate. Brooklyn is Black Brooklyn is very proud of itself, but there are debates between North and South. Black Southerners tend to, in Negroland, tend to consider themselves rather more refined and of better lineage than many Black Northerners.
One of the Negroland phenomena that I find really fascinating, as we are in New England, is the vacation culture of the Inkwell and Martha's Vineyard.
Right.
I find it so.
There's that. Also, there was Sag Harbor for a long time. In the Midwest, there was Union Pier.
Okay.
So they're all over. But when I wanted to ask you, DeAndre, what do you think is the hub from your years in Atlanta? What did Morehouse people and Atlantans think of as the hub?
So it was really interesting because most Morehouse students are from out of state, but a lot of them come from a lot of the places that you've sort of mapped as Negroland. Right. And it was interesting hearing about that, being from California and being from Northern California. And so my roommate in my first year was from Memphis, and he's from,
God, one of those old Memphis
funeral
parlor families. Funeral parlor and insurance.
And so, Memphis and even North Carolina is real big, but Atlanta is really the hub, the gateway of the South. And so it really seemed to be, it wasn't even necessarily the capital. It was more like the New York City of Negroland.
I know what you mean. All those schools starting so early and attracting so many generations of people, and with this, lineage of people like Du Bois. And,
there's something kind of interesting about now, like Atlanta in its contemporary Negroland function being sort of the LA, the Hollywood of Negroland. That's where the Black entertainment elites really are centralized. And so, for your question to him and to your response, I think it's funny how Negroland's geographic economy shifts in different moments and stuff like that.
Yes, and fashionability. Also, it depends what the standards are. When my sister married a South Carolinian, she thought, because we were sophisticated Northerners, oh please, I'm going down to this little South Carolina town, and suddenly her then mother-in-law was saying things like, oh, the rougher, coarser Negroes came from Mississippi, and cutting her eyes at my sister, and making cracking wise about skin color and such. So it also depends what the snob values are in any era.
Wow. So the young lady here in the cap.
Hi, my name is Hassani Scott. I'm a junior and I study Africana Studies.
Wonderful.
Thank you for your time this evening. So one thing that stuck with me during your talk was this use of the term cultural memoir. And my question for you is if you have any advice for emerging scholars and academics whose work is predicated on sharing personal narratives and cultural narratives.
Whoa.
How do you write this book? Now, answer her.
It's an interesting question. For one thing, you really do. It's a little bit like, if you were very serious about being a critic, then there are a couple of selves. One is the really relentless, researcher, the kind of scholarly part of the critic. And then there's another part that really wants to relive and recreate in prose this intimate experience, sensuous experience of a piece of art or music or whatever. And then there's a third part that is mediating between those two and finding the shape and the inflections and reflection. I would say it's very similar if you are doing, kind of this serious research work, but wanting to blend it with a cultural narrative. There is that part of you that just, is as serious as if you were doing, straight history or, psychology or whatever. Then there is the memory memoir part of you that is giving rein to and really exploring, examining through confession, dramatization, the private psyche. And then there is the third part, that's the writer's craft, that is working out the composition. How do they fit together? When does one play a supporting role and the other a leading role? What are their relations to each other? How do they fit into my themes? How do they query each other? What are what are the themes that are really emerging? You take a lot of time to look at the work you've amassed, the private work and the more, let's call it scholarly, and examine what shapes, and also let it enter you, almost your unconscious. What's emerging here that I wasn't even aware of? Always look to catch yourself by surprise too. So yeah. Does that help?
That helps a lot. Thank you very much.
I think just quickly, we have about time for 1.5 more questions. So I want to make sure we get those before we head down to have you all have the opportunity to purchase Margo's book and have it signed. Are there other remaining questions?
One thing I will add quickly, I'm just now reading a combination of exactly what we were discussing by a woman named Laurette Savoy. She teaches at Holyoke. She's an earth historian, which we used to call a geologist, and the book is called Trace, memory, history, race, and the American landscape. It's fascinating.
Wonderful. That's very valuable. That sort of, though, that it's funny because so much of the work we do as scholars has to be informed by work that others have done.
Exactly.
And when we don't have those roadmaps, it can be so daunting.
Yeah.
So I want to, before we head to the book signing, thank 3 people that have been very instrumental in realizing this event. Anne-Marie Pont in the Center for Students of Color has really lent so much guidance from day one. Shelley Adrians, who works in the SAO, has really helped with the process of navigating Brown's, some people would call it bureaucratic, some people would call it rigorous, event production process. And then Professor Wendy Chun in Modern Culture and Media, who, when I called my old concentration department, worked tirelessly to get us the funding that we needed to fully realize the event. So I would like for you all to please give Margo a hand. And
Thank you. I want to thank the same people you thank, but I really want to thank you, okay, because you really generated it. And thank you all for coming.
thank you, Margo.